I'm Rob Wolcott, the co-founder and chair of the World Innovation Network, or TWIN. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Major Cooper for the opportunity to be with you today. Obviously, we're not actually together in person, but I do hope after this pandemic abates, we will have the opportunity to meet in groups and explore the future together. I have great respect for what all of you do in our armed forces and related organizations within our government, and certainly within the educational institutions associated with the Department of Defense. So thank you so much for the honor to be with you today. In our short period of time, I'd like to do two things. First, I'd like to explore with you something I call proximity. And this is where everything in our lives and world are going across all industries and sectors over the rest of our lives as a result of digital technologies. What is proximity and how do we know it is having such an impact? And then second, what do we do about it? With respect to this, given we only have limited time, I'll share two design principles with you that I use anytime I'm thinking about building solutions or systems or platforms. I'm advising companies I work with or startups I've invested in or working with my students at the Kellogg School of Management or the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago. So with this, I'd like to transition to slides, and hopefully I can handle my PhD will enable me to get to screen share effectively. So bear with me. Let's hope I don't bugger this one up. Hopefully you can see that. So proximity, robustness, evolvability. Now, through this pandemic, the word resilience has been used often. And it's a great word, but it concerns me a bit because I think that it represents the wrong concept for most of us as we think about facing challenges, as each of you do in your roles with the military. And that is, resilience suggests that we need to endure and remain the same. I know it doesn't have to mean this, but I think that it does have this connotation. We need to endure the challenges, the slings and arrows, and yet somehow remain the same through it all. When that's not really exactly the solution that we should look for to remain a thriving species in the long run. And so while I agree with Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England last year, when he said that the pandemic is shifting our focus from global efficiency, such as globally extended supply chains with suppliers across the world, into one concerned more with local resilience. While I agree with him, I think we have to do better than resilience. I think we have to think about something broader. And the way I like to think about this is something I learned from a field called complexity theory. I'm not going to explain it to you. I'm not even going to go into much detail here today about what these two words mean, but I will tell you they are profound. And the more I think about them and work through them on various challenges, the more I learn. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to look up these words and reach out to the field of complexity theory. A place to start, if you're interested, is the Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico, one of the global birthplaces of complexity theory. I've learned so much from their CEO, David Krakauer, an evolutionary geneticist, and been able to apply a lot of the insights from complexity theory to other realms. So the two design principles I think about often, they are not really in conflict, but they can be at odds with each other from time to time, but they're certainly complementary if done well. And that is robustness and evolvability. So robustness is what you think it is, strong and healthy and constitution, like all of you are built to be in the US military. But the key point from a complexity theory perspective is that when a system is assailed from an outside force, from a change in the conditions, that it is able to continue to function. So think about the internet, for instance, and where that evolved in order to try and provide communications infrastructure for the United States, even in the face of a nuclear attack. So that's robustness. And resilience, by the way, as a formal matter in complexity theory, resilience is really a subset of the notion of robustness. You look it up if you're interested. Now, the other word, the complement to this, is evolvability. So we don't just want to build systems that are robust, that continue on their path regardless of what's going on around, because that means they don't have enough ability to flex, to transition, to adjust to changing conditions. And this is where evolvability comes in, the ability to adapt as conditions change. Now, there's a lot underneath this we don't have time to go into, but if you find this of interest, I encourage you to look up the notions of robustness and evolvability. And while I present the remainder of my presentation about proximity, I'd like you to think about how robustness and evolvability relate to the systems, platforms, capabilities, all aspects of what you do within the US military and beyond, and how you develop, design, and deploy those in the world. So where does this proximity notion come from? Well, about 6 years ago, I was thinking about this vast range of digital or digitally enabled technology. So I mean this very broadly, whether it's Internet of Things or artificial intelligence, or even, for instance, rooftop solar energy generation or 3D printing. These aren't digital per se, but they are certainly digitally enabled. And I was trying to understand what dynamics they drive in the marketplace, what underlying commonalities they have in terms of how they operate and what changes they wrought. And one thing I realized was that each of these digital technologies in their own ways allows us to distribute capabilities in smaller and smaller locations, ever closer to each potential moment of demand. So they allow us to distribute sensing, analytics, agency, the ability to make decisions, production, think 3D printing or distributed energy, at smaller and smaller and more locations all around the universe. And as we do this, the dynamic thus they drive together is digital technologies push the production and provision of products and services ever closer to the moment of demand in time and space. Now, by the way, you can replace products and services with value, because customers, or in your case, fill in the blank for customers, could be those in the field, those in a battlefield environment, for instance, or doing their jobs around at bases around the world. So the value that is required in any moment in time and space due to digital technologies, that value can be increasingly produced ever closer to the moment at which it might be demanded. Now, this will be true the rest of our lives across all industries, and this opens up enormous opportunities for military and defense applications. So let me give you a few simple examples. Amazon, we're all familiar with this company. As many of you know, Amazon's watching us at every moment. What are we clicking on? What are we searching for? What are we thinking about buying? There's something they call cursor hover time. I like to call it digital drooling, because that's the product that the fishing rod that your wife told you not to buy, but you keep going back to the same fishing rod, and Amazon knows you're going to buy that fishing rod. So Amazon sends that exact fishing rod to the distribution center near your home before you've ordered the product. Now, let me say this again, we think we're going to have a lot of demand for fishing rods, so let's send 144 of them to the distro center in Virginia. No, they're going to send that exact fishing rod near your house before you've ordered the product. This is called anticipatory shipping. And Amazon's been doing this for at least 3 years. Do you think they're getting better at it? This is but one example of the application of digital technologies to drive proximity. Now let's think about hard goods, not just online commerce, digital. Let's think about the production of hard goods and where they might be required in the world. Today, we have a global supply chain optimized for scale manufacturing at a distance. What do I mean by this? Well, the larger my plant, the lower my costs. Not always true, but for the most part. Over the next 30 years, this model will be ripped apart, will be obliterated. Now, what I'm not saying is that there won't be any huge plants in Mexico or China or Germany or the United States in 20 or 30 years. Of course, there will still be some large scale plants in situations where it is economically most viable to do so. But we will also have, and we're already starting to see this happen, mid-sized plants closer to points of demand, smaller instantiations, and eventually in neighborhoods or downtown urban areas, and eventually on our counter in our kitchen at home. Now, 3D printing is not good enough for this yet, but a lot of people are working on it. So where might we be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? 10 years sounds like a long time, but it's not. Now, think about this at-home 3D printer. Think about how hard it is to buy one matching fork. Let's say for whatever reason you want to buy one matching fork. It turns out it's incredibly difficult. Traditionally, how do we buy one matching fork? Well, someone in Western Australia mines iron ore, they put it on a ship, they send it to Southeast China, they melt it down, they alloy it, they send it to another plant which makes 12 matching forks. They put them in a box onto a pallet, into a ship, across the Pacific Ocean, to the port of Long Beach, onto a train, into a truck, into a crate and barrel store, online or in person, and I buy 12 matching forks. That's how I buy a matching fork today. Now, note that right now, as we speak, the technology is trivial in order to download a file, push a button, and print one matching fork. Now, we can't yet do this because the infrastructure does not exist, but it is technologically trivial to do this. So therefore, over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we will start to see more and more applications of 3D printing. And I know you and your colleagues in the US military and other militaries are experimenting with 3D printing. But what I want to emphasize is the true breakthroughs will not happen from doing a little better of what we already do. The true breakthroughs will happen by doing what we could never have done before. Now, most organizations look at a new technology and they say, what could we use this for to be better at what we already do? Now, this is a great question. Keep asking it, but it's not enough. The breakthrough happens when you say, what does this technology allow us to do that was impossible before? So I'll give you an example. Back about 5 years ago, I was visiting Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control in Orlando, Florida. I was visiting with the engineer in charge of keeping track of 3D printing developments. He showed me a prototype part that had been sliced in half, a metal part with a lattice work. It was mostly empty on the inside. He said this part for an aircraft engine has the weight of aluminum and the strength of steel. The weight of aluminum and the strength of steel. And before 3D printing, it was impossible to produce this part. It is that kind of development that opens up brand new opportunities and vistas to explore. And this is how I want you to think about any new technology with which you're confronted. First, ask, to get familiarity with it, what does it do? Fundamentally, what does it enable? Second, how can we do better at what we already do? This is a good exercise. It's not enough, but it's a good exercise. It also happens to be a little easier to get traction with your colleagues to convince them to maybe try it out. But then third, and this is the kicker, what can we do with this technology we could never have done before in various environments? Now, here's an example that I love. I love it so much. I've invested with them and gotten to know some of the team members at Uncork. This is a company that is a leader in what's called the no-code or low-code movement. Now everybody talks about learning how to code and teaching kids how to code, and I'm a big fan of that. My daughters, Jolie and Sage, will learn how to code for sure. They've already started. But that is not a magic answer to jobs in the future, because over time, computers will be increasingly able to code themselves. But what this also means on the positive side is that human beings, all of us, whether we know how to code or not, will be able to create and pilot and trial various software capabilities without having to go find IT professionals, without having to go find coders. So Uncork, you can look it up, was founded by the former CIO of MetLife, a big global insurance company. And he was upset about the fact that anytime they wanted to create a new software-based capability, they had to do the business requirements document, then they had to do the technical requirements document, then they had to go out and find an IT team to go and code the darn thing. And then 6 months, 12 months later, they would come back with their first version, they would test it, and it wasn't what they wanted. And he said, what if, and I love this question, what if we as a business person, without knowing how to code, could say, here is the software application I want, and here is how I want it to work, and here is the output I would like to receive. And the computer would do the coding itself. This is Uncork. And by the way, back in October of last year, they had their third round of funding. They now have an over $2 billion valuation. And I would not be at all surprised if you see them go public sometime next year and truly change the world. This is an example of proximity, because imagine when more and more people have the ability to create software capabilities without having to go through the process of engaging IT professionals to make it happen. They can figure out the needs they have in the moment, in the theater of operations, wherever it happens to be, and pilot and try and roll out enterprise-grade software for a wide variety of applications. Now, here's another example from energy, and I know energy is of critical importance to everyone in the military. Moving that liquid around is incredibly expensive and complicated. Now, what if we could use rooftop solar, renewable energies, other kinds of energies, energy storage, for instance? What if we could leverage different kinds of energy sources more effectively, dynamically, through software platforms? Well, so Generac is a very traditional company. You might have heard of them. They make backup generators. Doesn't sound particularly exciting. They've done it for decades. You buy your backup generator, you plug it into your natural gas feed at your home, and if the power goes out, it kicks on. Great. But the people at Generac said, you know, the future's coming and we want to be ahead of it. So what if we were to offer our customers the opportunity to use those generators to connect them to the grid, to track pricing on the grid, demand for energy. And when prices go up beyond the cost of production of my Generac generator at my home, very small scale, the system will turn on the generator, produce energy, and sell that energy back to the grid. This is an example of a platform leveraging software, data, and connectivity to dramatically over time increase the efficiency and effectiveness and flexibility and evolvability of our energy grid and our energy system. Eventually, 30, 50, whenever years from now, it is possible to imagine a world where the grid is no longer the operative issue, where more and more energy is produced in microgrid locations or at the point of demand as a result of many of the renewable energies that are being developed right now. So Generac had this vision. They went out, they found a startup called Embala. They bought it, and they're right now offering this capability to all of their customers, consumer and industrial. And they have plans for the next horizon and the horizon after that as to how this evolves into a truly robust and evolvable system providing energy to their customers. Now, my last example in our brief time together is with a colleague of yours from the US Army. I hope it's okay if I talk about a colleague from the Army. And that is this good friend of mine, Colonel Jeffrey Ling. Jeff is a medical doctor. He's been with the Army for many, many years. He also practices medicine at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And he's had 5 or 6 tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. And one of the things he's encountered as an Army doctor is drug shortages. Now, you might have encountered these in your work in various places. He recounts examples from Afghanistan where they needed very simple generic drugs and they didn't have any, they were out. And so the drug was put in a flight suit of an F-16 pilot from Longstuhl Air Force Base in Germany and flown to Afghanistan. Now, you want to talk about inefficiency. You want to talk about cost. So Dr. Ling was confronting these drug shortages in the field, but frankly, he confronts these as most doctors do in the United States in their own hospitals. He practices at Johns Hopkins, one of the top institutions in the country, and they face drug shortages from time to time. Incidentally, most of our generic drugs in the United States are produced overseas. That is a risk for America. And so Dr. Ling, being a medical doctor and also a PhD in medicinal chemistry, said, what if I could make the product here myself? What if I had a piece of equipment that I could push a button and it would take the basic constituents, which by the way are oxygen and carbon and things like this, and combine them together into the pill I need? Now, this might sound like science fiction, but in fact, it's already real. So Dr. Ling later on went to become a program manager at DARPA. And during that tour at DARPA, he funded a group at MIT to develop the equipment you see in front of you here on your screen. Last year, it looked like the equipment in the center of the screen, and their objective within a couple of years is to have something that looks like a printer, a typical printer that you see on the right side of your screen, that right now today, this equipment can produce over 14 different kinds of drug classes. Now, what this means is that piece of equipment about the size of a small refrigerator can sit in a hospital or a fire station or in a base somewhere in the world, and at the push of a button can produce the same ciprofloxacin pills, for instance, that you would get at your local Walgreens or CVS. The exact same product made to order on site. Push a button, I need 100 doses of ciprofloxacin, and hours later, the product is ready. Now, imagine what this kind of proximity, the ability to literally produce pharmaceutical drugs at the point of demand, what that can do for resilience, what that can do for robustness and evolvability of the systems within which we operate. Now, take this another step further. What about developing countries where they don't have generic medications? They don't have access except insofar as pharmaceutical companies and development organizations offer them largesse to give them large stores of drugs. This system. And let's go another step further. Think about the inputs, the ingredients, and the shelf life of pharmaceutical drugs. The United States government, as you might know, buys millions of doses of ciprofloxacin and has them in store. And by the way, this equipment can work for dozens of different kinds of drugs. I'm just using Cipro as an example. They buy millions of doses of Cipro a year to have on hand in case of a biological attack. It's a medication for anthrax, for instance. Now, every few years, they have to throw these pills out because they expire and buy brand new pills. Now, with this system, on-demand pharmaceutical system, the inputs are oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. The shelf life of carbon is a really long time. I don't know, perhaps eternity. So now you've taken a finished value-added product that sits in inventory and has to be thrown out every few years and turned it into an infinite shelf life, easy to transport atomic product. This is an example of proximity. It's one of my favorite, not only because of the personal value, the human value of the pharmaceutical, but also because it's non-obvious. If there were a space where someone might say, oh, you know, proximity sounds great, but you could never do that with something like pharmaceuticals. Regulation, safety, we need to have a large centralized plant where we make sure every pill is exactly the same as every other pill. Well, it turns out we can. So the question I would leave you with here is, how will you lead the proximity revolution? What might pushing the production and provision of value ever closer to the moment it might be demanded by a warfighter? At the moment it might be demanded by a medical outfit somewhere in the world. How might you leverage digital technologies to do what we need, when we need, where we need it, to keep America safe and the world safe for democracy? And I'll end by saying the research is clear. Human beings are motivated by sense of mission and purpose. And you in the military have, more than almost anyone else that I've known in my career, have that deep sense of mission and purpose. As you transition out of the military one day, whether that's to retirement in the long run or transition into the private sector or nonprofits, keep that notion of purpose in mind and understand you need to find places where they have that sense and they build that sense and they act on that sense of purpose. Second, human beings grow through challenges. Organizations grow through challenges. We do not much grow when everything's going well, when stuff's happening exactly to plan, when everything's moving along, not a lot of adversity. It feels good, it's nice, but we don't really grow much. We truly grow when we face challenges. So our job as leaders is to define the challenges and pose them to our teams before the world does it to us. Proximity is an opportunity to provide us with robust, evolvable solutions to whatever problems might arise. Thank you again to the U.S. Marine Corps University, to each of you for your service and engagement. I look forward to engaging with you in person at some point in the future.